We are on day 4 of our study entitled None Like Him. And we've looked at Joseph, Moses, Job, and now today Josiah. Josiah. This is what the Bible says about this fellow. Before him there was no king like him who turned to the Lord with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. So he was unique among the kings before him and the kings after him. There was none like him who turned his heart wholeheartedly. And he's put into a group of people that had some pretty good kings. There were some pretty good kings. Do you agree? Who's in the list of kings? Yeah, David, Solomon, Manasseh, who a lot of his reign was good. There were other good kings as well. There was none like Josiah, who turned his heart to the Lord wholeheartedly. So Kevin's going to word us a prayer, and then we'll get started.
Lord, we're thankful that we can all be here this morning and to learn about your word and your will for us. We're thankful that we can gather this week to learn with our children as well as they study and learn how to dedicate their lives to you, and pray that we rededicate ours to you as well.
Amen. So let's set the scene on which Josiah arrives. About 80 years prior, the northern part of the people of Israel/Judah, the nation of Israel, had been overtaken by what nation? Assyria. And the way conquering nations tended to put down a people, a subject people, they would pretty much scatter them, right? So you take, let's say Campbell Road, about 300 people. Let's take 50 of them and send them to Portland, and 20 of them and send them to Oklahoma City, and 20 of them here and there, and just spread them all over. Except we're going to leave maybe the ones that weren't leaders, you know, the poorest. Yeah, the poorest and the most insignificant of us. And leave those here. You leave those 5 or 10 here. That would destroy Campbell Road, right? We know, because we're just scattered all over the place. And that's what conquering nations tended to do. You're not going to start a rebellion when you're spread out like that. It's over. You're done. But there were still people in that northern area. In fact, you see them referenced in the story of Josiah. So what's left up in the northern part is just a remnant, very weak. And in Judah, the lower nation, King Hezekiah reigns. He's mostly a good king. He tends to be a little bit naive, because when emissaries from another foreign nation show up, what does King Hezekiah do? Shows them all the treasures of Israel. Hey, have you seen my jewelry collection? You know, and kind of naive. And the Lord tells him that's not going to work out well. And surely enough, by the time we get to the end of today's story, it does not. And then Hezekiah had a son named Manasseh. Manasseh reigned 55 years and was wholly evil. There's nothing good said about Manasseh. He was evil to the point of even introducing child sacrifice, which had probably been around in that area for some time, but it makes a point He even sacrificed his own child. So makes a point of saying that that was a signature evil that he brought on. So why would you be sacrificing children if you're part of Judah? Part of the people? Yeah, I mean, so they had come in a long time ago, during the time of Joshua and Caleb and all those guys. They had come into a region that pretty much had their panoply of gods, the god of this, god of that, god of the mountains, god of those waters, god of rain, god of fertility, over agriculture. They had all their gods all set up for different things. And here comes Israel into the people of Israel into this area. And what does God tell them is going to happen if they don't shoo everybody off? That's already the inhabitants of that land. Yeah, they're going to be tempted to take on that idolatry, and that's exactly what happens. And it actually, the first record we have of that happening under the kings is which king? Did it happen under David? Not so much. Did it happen under Solomon? Right? And it looked like it was kind of a political thing with Solomon, right? He had married all these foreign wives and started building structures in honor of their gods, these foreign gods. So it was a long-term practice. And what you see from Solomon forward is, it's almost like a pendulum. Good king, tear some things down, some of these idols down, right? Bad king, let's build some more. Good king, tear them down. Bad king, build them back. It just goes back and forth and back and forth and back. Pretty much the only thing constant in Judah was change. I mean, you don't invest too much in the current administration because you have no idea what the next one's going to be like. It tended to go back and forth. Now in Israel, once the kings of Israel figured out that if their people go to Jerusalem to worship, I've kind of lost control of them, right? Now they started making other accommodations for their people to worship in the north. So they were pretty much fully invested in the idolatry of the nations around them to hold sway over the people. But in Israel and in Judah, it would go back and forth, back and forth. Now it says Manasseh was wholly evil. Look over in 2 Kings 21. I'm going to read 1 through 6, and then I'll skip down to 9 and 16. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was something. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. For he rebuilt the high places that Hezekiah his father had destroyed. You see the pendulum? Hezekiah destroyed, and he rebuilt. Manasseh rebuilds them. And he erected altars for Baal and made an Asherah. That was be a big, tall, probably a spire, big, tall Asherah pole or steel, as Ahab king of Israel had done, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. And he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem I'll put my name. And he built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. So he's filling up the temple area with all these idols. And he burned his son as an offering and used fortune-telling and omens, and dealt with mediums and with necromancers, people who talk to the dead, quote unquote. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. I'm going to skip down to verse 9. The beginning of verse 9, God said, I'll put my name forever there. I want you to be wholly devoted to me, Jehovah. But the people did not listen, and Manasseh led them astray to do more evil than the nations had done whom the Lord destroyed before the people of Israel. You thought the Canaanites were off the mark. It says here that the people of Judah under Manasseh were worse than the Canaanites that God had told Israel to shoo off. So not a very complimentary commentary on what was going on there. So the people were all in, you know, they were following that fellow Manasseh. In verse 16, moreover, Manasseh shed very much innocent blood till he had filled Jerusalem from one end to the other. Innocent blood, probably his children. Till he had filled Jerusalem from one end to the other, besides the sin that he made to Judah to sin, so that they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So there are two gods that are specifically mentioned there, Asherah and Baal. These were both, first records, maybe Sumer, but in that Canaanite region. Asherah was the wife of El. El being the supreme top god. I think Zeus or Jupiter in Greco-Roman mythology. El's the top god. And Asherah was his wife / consort. She's the one who populated the earth with people, pretty much. Definitely, she was the mother of all the gods, other than El. And she was taken for millennia as the goddess of fertility by different nations. And Baal was one of El's sons. And it was given to Baal to be the supreme god. And so he kind of takes El's place. El is like, he's still the supreme god, but he's like on vacation. He's out of the picture pretty much. It's Baal who is operating on everything. He was the god of agriculture / rain. Thunder god, right? For fertility and agriculture. Think about it's the feminine and masculine side of reproduction, whether it's agricultural reproduction, human reproduction, whatever you. So what do you think was involved in worshiping gods and goddesses of fertility and reproduction? There was a lot of immorality involved with that. And we see that even in the first century. Still, when Paul goes over to Asia, he's still having to kind of deal with that. Or into Greece, those concepts of we need to appease the gods of reproduction because we want agriculture to be good, we want livestock, we want the next generation of livestock, we want our own families to continue to reproduce. And so pretty much all of anytime you come across a pagan type of religion and culture, you're going to see some form of Asherah and Baal there. A lot of physical immorality involved, and but what was God's main concern? All of it's concerning, right? There's not a part of all of this that's not concerning to God. But what was his main concern with his people taking on these other entities and worshiping them?
Following him.
So Mariana said they're not following him. But what if I was to tell you, you can have your Jehovah stuff, you can have your temple, you can still worship Jehovah, but we need to add these others. Yes, ma'am. I mean, Jehovah's in the panoply of gods of Judah, right? He is still worshipped. But what have they done? They've drawn a frame around Jehovah and said, okay, this is your region, this is your area of life, here's Baal's area of life, here's Asherah's area of life. They've compartmentalized God, made him one of the many that they worship. Terry, did you ever hear that?
That's exactly what the Romans did. That's what they allowed and how they were able to occupy the territories to keep people the peace.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they did with the Jews, is they allowed them to continue worshiping,
Yeah,
even though they had all these other gods.
because at the time of the first century, Terry was saying the Romans allowed the Jews to continue to have their temple and operate because that was a ancient religion at that time, right? Judaism was ancient, so there was some respect for Jehovah, as long as you don't get in the way of all these other gods, right? And Romans actually considered Christians what? They were atheists because they only had one God. They would consider us atheists because we don't have one God. Rick?
Well, and the Romans allowed it too because they couldn't put a form to God.
Mm,
And so there wasn't an object to the Jews.
right.
And so the Romans tolerated that because they couldn't point to an idol.
Right. You can be a Jew and be in good standing with Rome if you're willing to do what? Yeah, offer sacrifices to Caesar, right? Who is, by the time we start reading, is now considered one of the gods. One of the gods. So that was the big problem, and God, especially like at places like, I think it's Ezekiel 16 and others, used very graphic language to describe why he was so upset with this. He said it's like adultery, right? I have betrothed you. You are my bride. I've treated you as well as anybody has ever treated a nation. And you've gone off and played the harlot with these other gods. Which tells you what about God? He's jealous. He wants all of you, right? Had a preacher one time who was an ex-Marine said, when you're a Marine, you're not a Marine 8 to 5, right? It's 24/7. God wants all of you, and I think that's why you see something up there with all his heart, all his soul, all his might. Josiah, this is the environment that Josiah was born into. 55 years of this. Can you remember what was going on 55 years ago? See, this is, right, 2020, 19, what would that be, 70? That's a long time. It's a long time. Were you born in 1970? I mean, man had just walked on the moon. That's a long time ago. There were 3 channels on the TV set. "55 years. So Manasseh has a son named Ammon, and he reigns for 2 years. 2 years. And then they say, we got to kill this guy, right? It's not going well. So it's actually part of the king's court that does him in. And he has a son named Josiah, who is 8 years old. And Josiah becomes king at 8 years old. Have you ever met an 8-year-old? Anybody you're willing to put in control of the United States of America? Any 8-year-olds? Sometimes it feels like we got one, but 8 years old, he becomes king. And I mean, from that point, you're going, this is probably not going to be a good story. But at 16 years old, 8 years, would that be right? About 8 years into his reign, what does he begin to do? It says, seek the God of David. Not seek the God of some other good king, but seek the God of, let's go all the way back to David. Seek the God of David. What does that mean, seeking the God of David? First of all, why call out David? And second of all, what does it mean to seek God? Why call out David? Man after God's own heart. I mean, he's prototypical. Saul was the first king, but David is the prototypical. David is the king that God chose, right? The people chose Saul. David is the God is the king that God chose. So that's why I call out David. He's going back to the kind of the original, right? The prototypical. Yes.
Also, their kingdom was at its zenith practically, because
Yeah.
remember David killed his 10,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they were mighty at war.
And it was unified.
Yes. So it was something that they could look back and pride.
David was somebody who had held this place together, right? Together. Because it was only a couple of generations later it was split in two, right? Very few.
He reunified during the period of the judges post-Joshua. He brought it all
Back together, right?
the kingdom back under the favor of God.
Yeah, and in fact, in the Judges it says every man was kind of his own king, right? There was no kingdom. It was just a bunch of people living in the same geographic area. But David unified, put it all back together, and maintained it during his kingdom, maintained that unity. So he's going back to prototype. But what does it mean to seek God? Did he seek David? No, he sought the God of David. What does it mean to seek God? Oh, and let me add this. What does it mean to seek God when you don't have the book of the law? When you've lost the law? Remember the environment that they were in. God, Jehovah, God, right? He wasn't just seeking a God. Who was he seeking? Oh, that one. Yeah, that one. What did Josiah at a tender young age, as a teenager, what did he understand? God is one. There is one God. All this other stuff is junk. Right? I mean, it is amazing that a young man does this, that a young man comes into a kingdom that has been 55 years decrepit and sees that. Right? Is able to wade through all of what has become now culture, generational, multi-generational culture that he lives in, and probably everything, just like in the Greco-Roman time, everything that you had to deal with in society was kind of structured under the assumption that you have all these gods and you need to appease all these different gods, and he had the wherewithal to push all of that aside and seek Jehovah. God is one. Any comments, questions on that? Yes, ma'am?
Part of the sadness during that time of the judges, too, was the fact that the religious leaders who were to guide the nation toward God were corrupt.
Yeah, that she says even the leaders were corrupt. Well, and you know, I kind of have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for people that Paul talks to about don't think on Sunday you're going to go to the Christian assembly and then on the rest of the week you can go to the temple and engage all this stuff, because for those people, going to church was, you know, for until they knew the Lord, going to church meant going to a temple prostitute. I mean, it was just backwards, just terrible. Things that that was them going to worship. And this society had become just the same way. Terrible stuff. Killing your kids was going to church. Engaging in immorality was going to church. And here comes Josiah and says, it just doesn't It's not coming together for him, right? It's just not making sense. Somebody had to have done what with Josiah? Somebody had to influence him, don't you think? Hilkiah, maybe the priest, was maybe one of his counselors. He seemed to have counselors that were willing to help him in his rebuilding program. Who else is specifically mentioned? Scribe. That's what I meant. These guys the guy that read to him, they were willing to help him get to that. Isn't his mama specifically mentioned? The few gentlemen that are in here, don't underestimate the power of a woman's influence in your family, in your community, in your nation. He began to seek the God of his ancestor David, his father David. At 20, this is at 16, at 20, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the idols. So 4 years time between he began to seek God and he began to purge. He began to act on what he had sought. So that's kind of proof that he was looking for Jehovah and get rid of everything else, because that's the first thing he does. He gets rid of everything else. And he had done it like no other God. There's different places where kings will tear down different things, the high places, the idols here and there. But what does it tend to always say? Except for, didn't quite go all in for some reason. It could have been the influence of the people. Please don't take away our local things. Do the big ones in Jerusalem, but don't take away our local thing. But here it's all gone. And he goes as far as to take the bones of the dead priests of these gods and goddesses and crush them up into and the idols and things, crush a bunch of stuff up into dust and throw them on the graveyards. Throw that dust on the graveyard. I mean, he was pretty serious about this. He was pretty serious about this. And you don't do that kind of a thing without people noticing, right? This was very out in the open. He was tearing down infrastructure that had been built for these gods. Let me ask you a question. What are idols an embodiment of? It's a trick question. I'll go ahead and tell you that. What are idols an embodiment of? See, that's the thing, isn't it? They're not an embodiment of gods because these gods don't exist. They're not real. They're an embodiment of the thoughts and the desires and the purposes of people, the one who builds the idol. So, when he's doing this physical thing of tearing down this infrastructure that is dedicated to these idols, it's a call for the people to change the way they think, to change what their desires are, and to change what their purposes are. You've missed the boat. We need to redirect, right? Yes, sir.
One thing that could have influenced him, because you mentioned specifically the sacrificing of or the killing of the prophets and scattering of bones and all
Mm-hmm.
that was prophesied in 1 Kings 13, specifically that a man named Josiah of the line of David is going to come and this is what he's going to do.
Sure enough. So he didn't have the book of the law, right, but he did have the book of the Kings, right? You would think he would have the book of the Kings, some history there, even if he didn't have it in the form that we have it now. The form we have it now probably was influenced by other, governments like to write things down, right? Especially kings, my posterity, scribes like to write things down. So he probably had that, and he was actually prophesied that something like that would happen. So he's sweeping everything clean, right? He turns his heart to God at 16. At 20, he sweeps everything clean. I'm reminded of Jesus made a statement when he was talking about evil spirits. An evil spirit kicked out of a house, and it floats around looking for a place, and he goes, I can't find any place. I'm going to go back to where I came from. By house, I think it means a tabernacle, a body, right? And it comes back, and it finds the house how? Swept clean and empty and all ready to move into. And it's another one of those things where you get a little peephole into another realm. He calls 7 of his, or calls 6 of his, 6 or 7, a bunch more of his evil spirit buddies and say, hey, found one that swept clean. So it's not enough to just get rid of the bad. What do you got to do? You got to rebuild. Now, regardless of your political persuasion, the last president that we had in this nation, one of his guiding principles was we need to fundamentally change. And how do you fundamentally change a nation? The first thing you do is start tearing down the existing infrastructure so that you can do what? Put something in its place. You got to put something in its place. And I think leaders still today understand that concept. And you'll see nations being taken down into a destructive, not destructive in a pejorative term, but just taking things down so that other things can be built back up. So, it kind of goes like that. And it's tough. It's kind of hard. I mean, I've built I kind of arranged my life based on the culture that I live in. And here comes Josiah, and he's tearing it all down. But now he's going to start rebuilding. He's going to start rebuilding. So we said at 16, he began to seek the God of David. 20, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of idols. At 26, he began a project to rebuild the temple, which had fallen into disrepair. To repair it, put it all back together. So, and this is just an amazing commentary on just the lackadaisical attitude of these people toward Jehovah. They had not only lost sight of Jehovah, the one God, but what about Jehovah? I mean, he's the one that had led them out of Israel. He was the one that had called Abraham. They lost sight of their whole history. It was just today, and everything else is a fog, almost like. They had lost sight of their whole history with Jehovah, as Jehovah's people. The temple itself had fallen into disrepair. So they're all cleaning up. Everybody's got brooms, right? And they're all cleaning up, and what does the high priest stumble over? The book of the law that Moses had written. So what's the book of the law? Some people say it's Deuteronomy. Some people say it's Leviticus. I tend to think it's probably the Pentateuch, those 5 books, because Jews tend to talk about the law and the prophets, the law and the prophets. And when they said the law, those were the books of Moses, right? So whatever your opinion is, but we do know it contained things about the festivals, right? Because how the people should comport themselves. Things about the priesthood, how the priesthood should operate. So we know it contained those things. We know it was written. It was the book of the law of Moses. So it could be Deuteronomy, could be Leviticus, it could be all 5 books of Moses. Hilkiah is the high priest, finds the book, gives it to a scribe. Scribe comes and reads it. And what is Josiah's response? Yeah, I mean, what in the world have we done? What have we been doing for all these years? Decades and decades and decades. Generation after generation. Not only is the temple, the physical structure, decrepit, But the hearts of the people have become decrepit because they have no idea. They have no idea of how they're supposed to be operating. When I read this, something came into my mind. The difference between restoration and reformation. Josiah didn't say, we've missed the boat. We need to make what we have better. He didn't say that. What did he do? We have now the book, the original, right? We have the original. And he said, we need to be doing that. We need to go back to the original, not fix some things with what we have now. That's the difference between restoration and reformation. And in what generation is restoration a thing? In what generation does restoration should be a call for God's people? Trick question. I see everybody's frowning at me. Every generation. Sometimes we tend to think, restoration was something that happened in the mid-1800s, right? Restoration is for every generation. Every generation needs to look at the original, the Word of God, and say, do I look like that? When is restoration complete? In my mind, restoration is complete when we look like Jerusalem. So go back and look at what Jerusalem was doing and ask yourself, restoration finished? And now we're just enjoying the fruits of restoration? Right? Or is there a challenge there? That there may be something, do a gap analysis. What were they doing? How were they doing it? What was on their heart? And if we're doing something different, don't try to reform. Maybe we need a better program to do what we're doing better, to more efficiently do what we're doing. Maybe what we need to do is say, we need to go do that. That's restoration. So he restores, what specifically is it mentioned that he restores? He restores the Levitical work that had been lost. I don't know what they were doing, but they weren't doing what Moses said to do. Restores, it spends a whole chapter talking about his restoration of something specifically. Passover says there had never been a Passover celebrated like this since the days of Samuel. Samuel lived about 1000 BC. We're now in about 620 BC. 380 years. How long has this country been in existence? What, 250, almost? 380 years since a Passover had been celebrated like this one. I want you to look at 2 Chronicles 34. 2 Chronicles 34. Terry, would you read for us 2 Chronicles 34, 31 through 33, and what this is a record of a covenant that Josiah makes before the people. He calls all the people together. So he's not like, okay, let's keep this book of the law secret amongst the upper echelon of people. He gets out there and he reads, he has this book of the law read to the people. And then he makes a covenant in verses 31 through 33 of 2 Chronicles 34. Go ahead, Terry.
Then the king stood in his place and made a covenant before the Lord, to follow the Lord, to keep his commandments, and his testimonies, and his statutes, with all his heart and all his soul, fulfilling the words of the covenant in this book. And he made all who were present in Jerusalem and Benjamin take a stand. So the inhabitants of Jerusalem did according to the covenant of God, the God of their fathers. Thus Josiah removed all the abominations from all the country that belonged to
all his days. When you see something like that, at least my mind goes, okay, what happened after his days? Right? This is testimony of the powerful influence that one man can have in a nation. And if not in a nation, maybe in a state. If not in a state, maybe in a city. If not in a city, maybe in your neighborhood, your job, your school. One person. One person. And he said, not only am I going to do the word of this law, I want you people to say you're going to do the same thing. He made them make a decision. Who does that remind you of? Choose you this day whom you will serve. The God of the Egyptians, the God of the nation that we come into. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Right? So the power of one man leading rightly is mentioned here. And when that one man tends to be when that one man departs the scene, other things depart too. Some of that commitment that he had departs too. A Passover like none other since Samuel. So the end of the story, so this is all good news. The end of the story is, so Assyria had been in descendancy for some time, become weaker. There was another country that came in, the Scythians, I think, came in and kind of fought them. So Assyria was kind of had their eyes, Sauron's eye was looking at someplace else. And they weren't messing with this area. So Josiah, it actually mentions that he did his reforms in areas around Manasseh, Ephraim, places like that. Now that's old Israel territory, right? That's not Judah territory. That's Israel territory. So he kind of, expanded. He's in the process of, it looks like, bringing, having the ability to bring this whole region back together under the Lord. He really was David 2.0, right? In a lot of different ways. And the amazing thing is, he did it in the environment that we read about, that 55 years of terrible things going on. He did it in that kind of environment. So Assyria's in descendancy. Egypt decides they're going to partner with Assyria and go fight some little upstarts that are showing up here and there. Do you know what that upstart's name is? Babylon. Babylon's starting to make noise in that region. So Egypt and Assyria go out and they're going to. So in order to get where all these Assyrians and Babylonians and Scythians and all that, those guys are all up in the north. Where's Egypt? Down here. Now he's got this Necho Pharaoh has got to do a flyover of Israeli territory. And Josiah says, no, not on my watch. You're not coming through. Because tends to be when an army, a large army goes through a region, bad things happen, right? For an army. If let's say China said, oh, we want to go attack Mexico and we're coming into Alaska and then going down through the Highway 1 in California to get down to Mexico, what do you think our response would be? Yeah, go ahead. What could go wrong, right? So Josiah says, we don't think so. Now Necho has a message for him. Pharaoh of Egypt. He says, God told me to go do this. So if you're standing against me, you're standing against your God. Do you believe him? Can you trust an Egyptian? What do you think? True?
The commentary says that it was.
It looks like it's true. It looks like it's true. Why do we know the history of the non-Israeli people in this time frame from 1,000? In fact, think about it from Abraham. We see different other people talked about, or individuals talked about even. Abraham forward. Why are they mentioned? Babylon, Assyria, Hittites, Canaanites, Amalekites. Why does God care about recording their history? Yeah, the key there is his people. These we know about these other people because they had interaction with God's people, right? They had interaction with God's people. And do you think it interesting? Do you kind of cock your head a little bit? There was this Melchizedek guy. And he was a priest of who? Most High God, right? Where did that come from? I thought God's people were the Israelites. Where did that come from? And now, fast forward, and you got Nico going, God told me, Jehovah God told me X, Y, Z. Today's conclusion, and tomorrow's might be different, ask me again. I think we'll never know this side of glory how much God was involved in non-Israelite activities. We know that he says, I control the nations. I control the nations. All we see is, so the highlight is on the people of God, and here comes Melchizedek through the light, right? Here comes Nico through the light. Here comes these others, through the light. And I just see little glimpses. I think God has always been in control and working his will in these other nations. And once Israel makes it into Babylon, we see it amazingly in a huge proportions, where God is giving dreams to different people. He gives dreams to pharaohs. He gives dreams to kings. God is truly active all around. And we'll probably never know the extent to which he was. All we can do is see the little flashes of light that Scripture gives us. So, Josiah decides to go up against Nico, and he's killed. He's killed. Now, Nico continues his little journey, and he makes a compact with Assyria, and Egypt and Assyria are defeated by the Babylonians. And so a new empire arises. A new empire arises, one that God had predicted. And the postscript in Israel is, Josiah has a son, and he reigns for 3 months. 3 months. And he's not very pleasing to Nico, this guy that did do the fly, killed the king and did the flyover anyway. So he takes him off the throne, Josiah's son, and he puts in I think it's his brother, he puts on the throne. So basically, within a season, not even a year, there's a Egyptian puppet on the throne of Israel. Now what happens is this guy doesn't toe the line, right? Maybe decided to hold back some tribute or just not doing what Nico wanted him to do. And the Babylonians are coming. Here come the Babylonians. Babylonians, they're coming closer, closer. And they, not in a flash, but over time, start taking apart Judah. And the way they operated is they would take the best and the brightest. All the rich, the temple utensils made of gold, the smart, young, vibrant people. Who was one of those? Daniel, exactly. Daniel went with the best and brightest. And they leave back behind the worker bees, right? The people, And then the king doesn't do what, the puppet king doesn't do what Babylon wants them to do. So they come in, and eventually, 12 years after Josiah, only 12 years, they take Jerusalem apart brick by brick and take everybody that's alive back to Babylon with them. And what is God doing in all of this? It seems like bad news when it's going on, right? But what is he actually doing? He's kind of put them through the fire to get rid of the dross, so that what's left is gold, and it's a remnant. A remnant for what purpose? It's all about Messiah. It's all about Messiah. And if this is for free, if somebody tells you we can't trust the Bible because God used Catholics to maintain the purity of the Scriptures, you tell them, well, God used Babylonians to maintain his people. So God gets to do that. And he tends to. He tends to use whoever he wants to. Good, bad, whatever. He tends to use whoever he wants to fulfill his purposes. The question is, what was God's purpose for this book? What was God's purpose of the people? So what character traits, we only got a couple of minutes, what character traits did you see in Josiah? He was obedient? Good. Courageous? Would you agree with that? You're kind of the one outlier, right? You're the one that's different. I'm sure there were other people that were just as grieved, but not very many of them. They weren't in positions of power. Here's what I had. First of all, he was humble. He was obedient because he was humble. He read the book and he said, that don't look like me. That don't look like my administration. We're going to change to look like the book.
And his son, in a similar situation, took the book and burned it.
And took the book and burned it. That's not very humble, is it? Right? He was humble. And he was wholehearted. It's not enough. It's not enough to say, I'm going to be God's people 3 hours on Sunday and hour on Wednesday and whenever I'm in front of other. This is an old joke. This is a joke from the 1970s. Baptists don't dance with other Baptists. Right? You be good as long as you're around good people. That's not what this is all about. He was born into and started his rule with a terrible nation, worse than the Canaanites that God had driven out before them. Worse. And he did not let that stop him to seek his God, to cleanse the nation of its idolatry, to rebuild the infrastructure, the foundations of Jehovah, and to follow his word. Those are the 4 positive things that Josiah did in his day. Don't forget, you are only one person. And you do live in a world that is full of terrible things going on. But be the change that you want to see. God calls us not to be heat, but to be what? Light. And that is the power of God in you. Thanks for your time.